Emily Anderson, a poor single mother, sat nervously in the crowded terminal of Los Angeles International Airport, holding her daughter's hand tightly. Her heart raced as she looked around at the busy travelers, each with a destination, a future ahead of them. But for Emily, all she could think about was the journey she and her daughter had been on. In her worn hands was a second-hand duffel bag, filled with the few belongings they had left. Emily had worked long hours at 2 jobs just to save enough money for these tickets. Tickets to Seattle, where her sister had promised them a fresh start. It was the first real chance Emily had to give her daughter a better life, to escape the hardships they had faced and find stability. But that dream started to crumble when an airline representative came to the counter. "I'm very sorry, Ms. Anderson," the agent said with a forced sympathy, "but we have an overbooking situation on this flight. Since you purchased one of our basic economy tickets, you and your daughter are among the passengers we need to accommodate on a later flight." Emily's heart sank. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Please, we can't wait for another flight. We have nowhere else to go." Her voice trembled as she explained their situation. This trip was their last hope. If they missed this flight, they'd be stuck in Los Angeles with nowhere to turn. The fresh start that her sister had promised felt farther away than ever. Emily's daughter looked up at her with confusion and worry, not understanding why this was happening. Emily forced a smile, but inside she was losing hope. Emily's daughter, Sarah, tugged gently at her sleeve, her small voice filled with hope. "Mom, will we see Aunt Rachel today?" she asked, her big eyes shining with excitement. The question hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She'd promised Sarah that everything would be different once they reached Seattle. They would finally be safe with a stable place to live, and Sarah could go to a good school. But now, standing in the crowded airport with no way forward, Emily's heart broke as she realized that her daughter's innocence only made the situation worse. Emily had worked so hard to make this fresh start happen, and now it seemed like it was slipping through her fingers. Her exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and she could feel the tiredness in every muscle of her body. 2 jobs, sleepless nights, constant worrying about bills, it had all led to this moment. The sound of voices around her blurred as she focused on her daughter's face, which was beginning to mirror the same concern Emily had hidden so well. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, their judgment heavy in the air as they filed past, headed to their gates, without a care about the woman with the worn-out bag and the little girl waiting for a flight that might never come. Just when Emily felt like she couldn't take any more, a voice broke through the tension. "Excuse me," a man said gently behind her. Emily turned to see a tall figure standing there, his eyes kind but serious. He was dressed in a dark suit, his presence commanding attention without effort. "I overheard your situation," the man continued, his voice smooth and calm. "I'd like to offer you my first-class seat. You and your daughter can take the next flight. I'm happy to wait for the later one." Emily was taken aback. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You're sure?" she asked, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The gate agent looked at the man with disbelief, hesitating for a moment. "Mr. Harrison, are you sure about this? You're a platinum member, so—" The man smiled and waved his hand dismissively. "I'm sure." "Please go ahead," he insisted. Emily stood there, stunned. She never expected this kind of kindness from a stranger. For a moment it felt like a dream. The gate agent handed Emily and her daughter their new boarding passes. Emily couldn't believe her eyes when she saw that they were for first class, something she never imagined they would experience. It felt unreal, like something out of a dream. She had always seen people in first class, with wide, comfy seats and a level of luxury that was far beyond her reach. But now here she was holding boarding passes for it. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the tickets. "Thank you," she whispered to the man who had made this possible. Her voice was filled with gratitude, but also with a sense of disbelief. How could she ever repay him for this? He had given up his seat, a seat she knew was far more valuable than hers. The man smiled warmly at her and handed her a sleek business card. "If you ever need anything in the future, don't hesitate to reach out," he said. "My contact information is there. I'd be happy to help if you need it." Emily took the card, still feeling overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this. All she could manage was a grateful nod as she walked toward the gate, still processing the kindness of a stranger who had completely changed the course of their day. As she and Sarah boarded the plane, Emily couldn't help but notice how different everything was. The seats were big and soft, with extra space that made her feel like she had stepped into another world. Sarah was already bouncing in her seat, wide-eyed and excited. "Look, Mom. These chairs are so big. Can we sit here every time we fly?" she asked, her excitement spilling over. Her daughter's joy was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, Emily allowed herself to relax just a little. But as the plane began to taxi down the runway, Emily's thoughts turned inward. She couldn't ignore the memories that crept into her mind, ones she had worked so hard to bury. She thought of her ex-husband, James, the man who had once promised her a life full of happiness, but had instead left her struggling to make ends meet. Their marriage had been full of broken promises, and it had taken everything Emily had to keep it together after he disappeared, taking their savings and leaving her to raise Sarah on her own. She remembered the nights she had stayed awake, worrying about how to pay the bills, the days when she felt like she was sinking under the weight of everything. But then she thought about the journey they were starting now, the fresh start they had in Seattle, the hope that had been given to her today by a stranger who saw her struggle and stepped in to help. Her mind kept returning to the man who had given up his seat, a man who clearly had everything, success, wealth, confidence, but had chosen to help her, someone he didn't even know. What was his story? What made him care so much? She wasn't used to people offering help without expecting something in return. It was hard to trust anyone after everything she had been through, but maybe this was a sign. Maybe things were finally starting to turn around for them. She glanced over at Sarah, who was happily watching the in-flight entertainment, and a small smile appeared on Emily's face. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something better, something she had longed for so desperately. After the plane touched down smoothly, Emily felt a mix of emotions. She was still trying to process everything that had happened, the unexpected kindness, the fresh start she and Sarah were about to have. As they walked off the plane, a flight attendant handed Emily a small envelope. She looked at the envelope, confused, but took it. Inside, she found transportation vouchers and a note written in neat handwriting. The note read, "To help you start your new chapter. Sometimes accepting help is its own form of strength. Wishing you all the best, Daniel Harrison." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. The kind gesture was more than she could have hoped for. She had always been the one to take care of things, to manage everything on her own. But here was a man who had offered help without expecting anything in return. She had always thought asking for help made her weak, but now, as she read the note, Emily realized that sometimes, accepting help was the strongest thing she could do. As Emily and Sarah stood near the baggage claim, waiting for her sister Rachel to arrive, Emily couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude and relief. Rachel had promised to meet them, but she was running late. Emily checked her phone again. Rachel had sent another message saying there had been a traffic accident, and it might take an hour or more for her to get there. Emily's stomach tightened at the thought of being stuck at the airport with no money and no place to go. Sarah, unaware of the worries swirling in her mother's mind, tugged at her hand and asked, "Mom, can we get something to eat while we wait?" Emily smiled softly and nodded, trying to mask the anxiety that was creeping in. They had a little money left, but not enough for a long wait or an expensive meal. She could feel the pressure mounting again. But then, as if on cue, a deep voice broke through her thoughts. "Emily," the voice called softly. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she turned to see Daniel Harrison standing a few feet away. He smiled at her, his presence calm and reassuring. He had been watching from afar, quietly observing their situation. Emily hadn't noticed him before, but now, seeing him again, she felt a strange sense of comfort. "I see you're still waiting for Rachel," Daniel said, walking over to them. Emily nodded, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's fine," she said quickly. "She'll be here soon." Daniel looked around and then nodded as if making a decision. "I have my security team watching the area," he said. "I've noticed your ex-husband has been following you." Emily's breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively pulled Sarah closer. "I don't want to alarm you," Daniel continued, "but he's been keeping track of your movements since you left Chicago. He's been looking for a way to get to you." Emily's heart raced. She had been trying so hard to escape her ex-husband's grip, but now it seemed like he was always just a step behind. The fear she had been trying to push aside came rushing back. Daniel's eyes softened with understanding. "Don't worry," he assured her. "My team is monitoring him closely. You're safe now. But we need to stay alert." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had no idea how Daniel had known about her ex-husband, but somehow she felt a little safer. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to fall into place. As Emily stood near the waiting area, trying to keep calm and control her growing anxiety, her worst fears seemed to come true. From the corner of her eye, she saw a familiar figure walking toward her. It was her ex-husband James. The man who had caused her so much pain, the one who had disappeared with their savings and left her to struggle. His confident stride, the same one he had when they were married, made Emily's stomach twist in knots. His eyes were cold and his mouth curled into a smug smile as he approached. "Emily," he said in a voice that sent chills down her spine. "It's been a while." Emily instinctively pulled her daughter closer, standing in front of her as a shield. Sarah didn't understand why her mother was acting so tense, but she could feel the change in the air. Emily's heart raced and she could feel the fear creeping in. She had worked so hard to protect Sarah, to give her a better life, and now James was back in the picture. James took a step forward, his eyes glinting with something dark. "I've been looking for you," he said, his tone cold. "You thought you could escape? I know what you've been up to. I'm not finished with you yet." Before Emily could respond, a strong, calm voice interrupted. "I don't think that's going to happen," the man said, stepping in front of Emily and her daughter. It was Daniel Harrison. He stood tall and confident, his eyes focused on James with a steady intensity that made the air seem to thicken. James hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised to see Daniel. "Who are you?" he sneered. "This doesn't concern you." "I'm someone who's been investigating your financial activities," Daniel said firmly. "And I can tell you right now, you're involved in some very serious criminal schemes. If you think you can intimidate this woman and her daughter, you're mistaken." Emily stared at Daniel, her eyes wide in disbelief. How did he know all of this? How did he know about James's shady dealings? Daniel turned to Emily, his voice gentle. "I've been following your ex-husband's activities for a while now. You're not the first victim he's targeted, but I can make sure you're the last." James's face turned red with anger, but he didn't say anything. He knew he couldn't argue with someone who clearly had the power and resources to expose him. After a long, tense moment, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Emily felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt free from her ex-husband's shadow. Daniel turned to her, his expression softening. "I know this must be overwhelming," he said. "But I want you to know I'm here to help. You and your daughter deserve a fresh start." Emily's mind was spinning. She had never expected anything like this. Daniel had stepped in when she had no one else to turn to. She realized that, despite her fear and doubts, she could trust him. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay you." "There's no need," Daniel replied. "I just want to help you move forward the way I wish I could have helped my sister." Emily looked at him, finally feeling the strength to believe that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change for the better. A new beginning was finally within her reach. After everything that had happened, Emily and her daughter finally felt like they were on the right path. They moved into a new apartment, a safe and comfortable place that Emily never imagined they would have. It wasn't luxurious, but it was theirs. For the first time in a long while, they didn't have to worry about where they would sleep or if they would have enough food. Emily found a job working with Daniel's foundation, helping other single parents rebuild their lives just like she had. Sarah started attending a new school in the neighborhood and she thrived there. The teachers were kind and the other kids accepted her. She made friends quickly, something Emily had feared wouldn't happen. Emily couldn't help but smile every time she saw Sarah running off to school with a backpack full of excitement, knowing that her daughter was finally getting the chance she deserved. Daniel's foundation provided support for children like Sarah, offering scholarships and programs that helped them succeed. It was a new beginning for both of them. As the weeks went by, Emily felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The fear of her ex-husband James was no longer hanging over her. Daniel's efforts led to James's arrest, and Emily could finally breathe easy, knowing he could no longer harm her or Sarah. The safety deposit box that Emily had kept for so long, a symbol of the past she was trying to escape, had played a key role in bringing James to justice. But Emily realized that the key wasn't just for the box. It had unlocked something far more important, a future where she and Sarah could live without fear. Emily often thought back to the dark days when she had struggled just to get by. She had doubted herself, afraid that things would never change. But now, looking at her daughter's bright smile and her own growing sense of peace, Emily knew that she had done the right thing. She had fought for her family, and despite all the challenges, she had made it through. Months passed and Emily found herself growing stronger with each day. She had rebuilt her life and now she was ready to rebuild her heart. For so long she had closed herself off from love, afraid of being hurt again. But as she looked at Daniel, who had shown her so much kindness and support, Emily realized that sometimes, you have to take risks in order to find happiness. One evening after dinner, Emily found herself sitting beside Daniel on the couch. They had both been through so much and somehow they had found a connection in their shared experiences. Emily could see the kindness in his eyes and she felt safe with him. He wasn't just a man who had helped them survive. He had become someone she could trust, someone who made her believe in love again. The story ends with Emily finally allowing herself to hope again. She wasn't afraid anymore. Her journey had led her to a place of happiness and peace, and she knew that this was only the beginning. With Sarah by her side and Daniel's support, Emily embraced the new chapter of her life with hope, knowing that the future held endless possibilities.